But let's go back to another one of the reasons why investment in this country, well, really isn't where it should be, and that is the huge cost of energy. Because, of course, we have insane net zero policies leading the world. The world is not following, but we're trying to lead them against their will. But one of the key things that's involved in that is, of course, trying to rely on wind power and solar power. And that involves the need to have a huge number of electricity, either cables or pylons across the country, networking into our countryside to link up the electric grid. Basically, otherwise we wouldn't be able to use that electricity as and when it's actually available. And a new report has suggested that despite what Ed Miliband says, that actually having the pylons is going to be cheaper than electric cables underground, which we don't have to see, don't blight our countryside, that's simply not true. Well, let's talk about this with Andy Mayer. He's an energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the free market think tank. Good morning to you, Andy.
Morning, Julia.
I'm wishing this rainy morning away. Tell us just, what is the point of all these pylons that Ed Miliband wants to build, and why is there such a concern about them in the first place?
OK, so if we're going to take the government's ambitions for building an energy system that's almost exclusively dependent on renewable power seriously, then we're going to need a lot more electricity cables. And principally, we're going to need the very large electricity cables, the transmission grid that connects big offshore wind farms to the coast, and then from the coast to the places that the power is needed. And so part of this debate about whether or not East Anglia should be covered in pylons is about what the best way of doing that is. So if we could spend quite an amount of time debating whether Ed Miliband is crazy to want this.
I mean, yeah, we don't know. We don't have to spend any time. Yeah. The answer is yes. Now move on.
So let's assume that they're going to do this anyway. What the debate is about is whether the normal way of doing transmission, which is mostly via pylons, and then about a fifth of these cables are buried in the ground, is better than burying the cables in the ground entirely using a slightly different technology. And there was a report done by the ESO, which is the electricity system operator, back in March that said the best option is to do it the normal way, which is build loads of pylons, about 120 miles of them, and bury a bit in areas of outstanding natural beauty. But there's this other option that may be cheaper over its lifetime if we make a large number of heroic assumptions about the future cost of things. Right. And I have to say I'm a bit suspect of that.
Yes, because they often make heroic assumptions about, oh no, this will reap benefits. But either way, we are talking about huge expenditure on the national grid, basically, because the main issue is we can't store the energy that is created by solar and wind power. That's the fundamental issue. It's not the same as gas power, which you can pretty much turn on and off, and nuclear power you can pretty much turn on and off. You get the power from the wind, so offshore or onshore or solar, you get that power, and it's just available then and there. So if you can't transport it, it's no sodding use to anyone. Is that the fundamental problem?
No, it's a slightly different problem, and that's a problem they think there will be solutions to in about 20 to 30 years' time.
Oh, good.
But that's not very helpful if you're Ed Miliband and you've just pretended in an election that you can build all this stuff in 5 years. Yes. So the reason the dates are important is that the big difference in cost is that the ESO was saying if you delay this project by 5 years to about 2034, then it'll be a little bit cheaper to do it in this other way.
But the target is for 2030, and that's for basically our entire electricity grid, not energy, but electricity grid, which is about 20% of our energy needs, will be carbon neutral. Basically, will be fossil fuel free.
Yeah, I mean, nobody believes this is going to happen.
No, including ESO, National Grid. That's the ESO is basically the National Grid. They've said we don't really think this is possible. But Ed Miliband, who I believe has the same degree that I have from university, not a science degree, by the way, not an engineering degree. No, we have no qualifications, but it's the same qualification as me. He, for some reason, thinks it's possible.
He does, but I don't think in his heart he thinks that it's actually going to happen.
What's going to happen in 2030 when we don't have enough energy to do this, enough electricity? What happens then? The lights go out?
At that point, he's reliant on interconnectors. So those are the connections principally with mainland Europe, where he hopes that, say, French nuclear power or whatever energy systems the Germans and the Danes and everybody else is building will bail us out if there are problems. Ultimately, if that looks unlikely to happen, and again, that will require some of the investment that we're talking about in East Anglia, then he's going to have to pay a vast amount of money to people who own gas power assets to stay open when he's threatened to close them and threatened to destroy all domestic sources of their gas supply.
Brilliant.
To bail us out in those windless days in the winter.
But here's the thing, like, you know, at the Institute of Economic Affairs, at the end of the day, businesses are not going to come to Britain if the energy costs are not just huge, but the energy itself is unreliable. This is such a fundamental part of the needs of business. We're not open for Britain if we don't have a sensible energy policy, and we do not have a sensible energy policy.
Well, no, a good illustration of that is this project. So if we wanted to get lots of cables in a world where everybody is demanding more cables and they think there's going to be a global shortage, then we need cheap energy, because to build the factories that make the cables requires an awful lot of power, and for that to be affordable.
Mind blown. Andy, this is the Catch-22 madness, and we've just walked right into energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you, Claire Pearsall. I mean, it's so painful. It's so painful. Again, you could be energy security or net zero secretary. You can't be both.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm still shocked that you don't have a science degree.
I understand it better than him.
You do.
He makes this stuff up.
It's beyond belief that he thinks that any of this is possible. Not even in 5 years. I mean, I just don't understand.
20 years, it's not possible.
No, of course it isn't. But why cut your nose to spite your face as well?
Because then you can go and get a lovely job in some international organisation that will pay you 6-7-figure salary in the years to come, because you want people to pat you on the back at your Islington dinner parties. That's literally how our country is run these days. That is the madness we are in. Team size, everybody.